All right. So the exercise that we are going to continue to do is working with um, Joy, and Joy does our data validation at our application tier. And part of what we did yesterday was we wrote some schemas for our users to be able to define new users and to log in our users. But now, we're going back and now we're working with books, and we're going to work over on these routes, which are getting a book by ID and listing our books and updating a book by its ID, adding books, etc. And so we're going to validate the data over here. So let's kind of start by booting up Postman. And notice I'm on port 3003. And this should be working with my Mongo database at this point. I'm not working with my users at this point, so I'm going to close my routes. I recommend you guys go ahead and save your routes and organize them and kind of start from a fresh, workspace. And if I just go to list all books, notice we are at port 3003, API books list, and we get back our books. One thing that we're going to be doing here when it comes to listing our books, I want you guys to think of anytime you search for data, like you go to Amazon and you do a search, what are some other operations that you typically can find when you search for a bunch of products? What other operations can you find on the data? Like you search for whatever you're searching for on Amazon.com, what else can you do typically? Okay, you're searching by description, but that's your keyword search, right?
Yeah.
Your keyword search is like, hey, I'm looking for this.
Are you talking about the selection on the side?
Yeah, what else can you select on the side?
You could do books, you could do different categories of them, you could select by a price range.
There you go. Okay, so you might provide some additional filters. You would call those filters, right? A filter might be my minimum price and my maximum price. Okay, so I'm not going to do a whole lot with list right now, but maybe in the future, and by maybe it's happening, in the future we're going to say, hey, give me all the books with the minimum and maximum price. Right? So I want to be able to do maybe a keyword search. So that's one thing. Give me all the books that have the word totalitarian. Say that 10 times fast. Right? Give me all, so searching by keywords, filtering by price, min and max price, maybe sorting data. Maybe I want to sort my results based by the author. Okay, so before we get to the front end, our back end should support these different filtering operations. So we're not going to do a lot with listing books today, but that is something that we will in the future. Okay, but let's do a book by ID. Now, if I get a book by ID, API books / book ID, that must not be a good book ID. So let's kind of hit this. And let's go here and let's paste in a good book ID, and we do get a book. Now, notice what happens. You guys might have seen this error. A couple people shake their head yes. What happens not only if I don't give it a good ID, like this is a 24 character string, right? I'm not going to count that, but let's just say that's 24. Okay, object IDs are 24 characters. And if you give it 24 characters, you get back a book. What if you give it 23 characters? Notice I delete one character. We get this error message, which is not friendly at all, right? It says BSON error, which if you look up BSON, it's kind of it's very similar to JSON, right? But input must be 24 character string, or 12 bytes of this, or an integer. Now if I just even do something like this, okay. So now if I give it 24 characters, but it's just not a valid ID, let's see. So there's C. If I say D, we have a D. We say N. We're getting this error currently.
Looks like it's hexadecimal characters.
Oh, that's it. That has to be hex characters. So what are hex characters? A through F are valid, and 1 through 9 are valid. So if I give it A, okay, there we go. Thank you for making that observation. It needs to be hex characters. You guys understand? Maybe N is not a valid hexadecimal character. Okay, hexadecimal, there's 15 valid characters. A through F and 0 through 9. Those are your valid entries. So I could put in an F, that is valid hexadecimal. Wait a minute, A through F, right? There we go. Come on. There it goes. So if I give it a valid hex number, that's simply saying the book's not found. Okay. So I'm gonna do a little bit of refactoring here, so that if I give it something like this, right, we get back a different error message that's not BSON error 24 hex string. So let's do this, right? And let's see if this is even worthwhile. Okay, so to be honest with you, we're gonna get this so that it gives me back a different error message using joy. And in the event that it's not a good object ID, we're going to simplify this error message down to something a little bit different. So let's start by adding a middleware function called validID.js. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the object ID function from MongoDB here. And this is going to be kind of similar to what we did yesterday. We're going to write a function called validID. It accepts a param name. And inside of this function, it's going to return rec, res, and next. So we're returning an anonymous function. And we're going to try catch something. Now we have access to the request object. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify the request object, and we're going to create a property on the request object. Now we're going to create a dynamic property. We don't know the name of the property that we're going to create. It's going to be passed in. We're going to create a property with whatever name is passed in here. Okay, in this case, we're going to pass in a string called ID. Yeah.
This might be a dumb question, but it's
Teachers are taught to say there are no dumb questions.
okay. Would there be a big difference if we're doing like rec parentheses framing as opposed to rec brackets framing?
Yeah, well, the other syntax here would be rec dot param name. Okay.
It's the same. Okay.
The other syntax is using the dot notation, but the thing you have to remember is when you don't know the name of the parameter, you have to use brackets. Okay, so that's not a dumb question. That's a very common question, and because it's a common point of confusion. Okay, so when you don't know the name of the parameter that you're creating, you must use bracket notation. So I would say that's a good question. So we're creating a new parameter name equal to a converted rec dot params dot. So again, this is the request object has a params object child, and then whatever the parameter name is. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a string called ID. This is going to create a rec.id equal to an object ID converted to the string, right? The string is converted to a Mongo object ID. Okay, so we're creating a parameter, rec.id, equal to a Mongo database object ID that is coming from the client. Remember, rec.params ultimately comes from the client, not in the body, right? Remember params comes from the URL, right? The URL. So we'll see this all fleshed out. We're going to try and do this. If this works, we're just going to call next. So I don't think we need to return next, although that's what I have coded. So I'm gonna code it this way. I think you could just call next. Otherwise, if there's an error, we're gonna return a status of 400. We're gonna send back a little message here that says error param name is not a valid object ID. All right, let me get my parenthesis. Let me get my parentheses right. Tick. There we go. And we're going to, at the end of this, export our function. Export valid ID. Okay, so in the good case, we're going to take the string that's coming from Postman, that is an ID, and we're going to create a new property on the request object that's called ID. This will be rec.id equal to a converted object ID, and then the good case that works. Okay, so this is valid ID. In the case it doesn't work, we end our function call early and we send to the client. So because we have access to the rec object, we can add properties to the rec object. Or the other thing that the middleware function can do is it can send a response back early. Right? So we can send a response back to the client, and so it kind of ends early. So let's import on our book. Let's import valid ID from our middleware folder, validid.js. Now I'm going to call that middleware function, validid, and pass in a string. Get my syntax. Now here, this is just called ID, so we're going to pass in the string of ID.
You need a comma.
And I need a comma. So what this is going to do is it's on our request object, it's going to create rec.id. And so we can kind of go into here. Now instead of having rec.params_id, remember rec.params_id is a string. But in the good case that this works without failure, without a catch block, we no longer have to go through rec.params_id, we have rec.id. Rec.id is an object ID now. It's been successfully converted to an object ID. Okay? Now, what goes in here has to match right here, right? This, if you call this something different, if you call this like book ID, then that's a variable that should be sent into here for this ultimately to work. Okay, so let's see now that we've refactored this. So now ID is rec.id, and we get the book by ID. So let's kind of go back here, get all the books. Let's just make sure that the good case works. Okay, good case still works. So we've refactored our code. And let's now test this case. A is null, it is still a valid object ID, right? But in the case that we do something like this, we get a kind of a simplified error message here. Just said ID is not a valid ID. So if you do something like object ID. So all these different error cases just give us, I would say, a more direct error message, right? And I think you guys would agree with that. It's a little bit easier to understand that ID is no longer a valid object ID. And you know, it's kind of cool, right? To kind of see the fact that we're modifying the request object in this middleware function. And in the bad case, you know, in the bad case, this middleware, like if I look here, what happens? This middleware function sends a response back to the client before any of this code would run, right? So in the case that the catch block runs and we have an invalid ID, none of this code runs, right? So that's the other thing that middleware can do, is it can send the response back to the client early. It can kind of terminate, you know, the request response cycle early. Okay, so that's cool. This valid ID. Now these are the two middleware functions that we're gonna, you know, write. Now we're not writing any more middleware functions, and you can kind of see the syntax is a little bit different, but consistent across the two of them. Okay, so for those of you following along, is your valid ID function middleware working? Great. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, good. Now that valid ID is working and whatnot, the other thing is like, hey, get book by ID. If it is a valid ID, let's look at our logic here for get book by ID in our database. Like it's returning null, and is that what you want? So if the find one doesn't find a book, right, that this query returns null. right? That's why you're seeing null, right? So in the case that it is a valid object ID, and ultimately this find one doesn't find a book, return null. And so you could test against that, right? I could say if book, right, is truthy, do this. What is going on with my bread? There we go. Woo. Woo. If book is truthy, send back the book. Else, book not found. Right? Probably better than null. You with me there? So, let's kind of go back to here. Let's find a good book. Okay, but if I replace C with an A, now it says book ID not found. Better than null? Better error message? And so you just gotta, use the tools that you know how to solve that problem. All right. So that's getting a book by the ID. That's our valid ID function. Yeah, I guess you could say it kind of sends back a cleaner error message, so I'm okay with it. We can keep it. Let's go to add. Okay. Now we've got these middleware functions. Let's bring in the valid body. Import valid body from valid body.js. And let's talk about, we said adding a new book. So step one, let's define a schema. So const new book schema equals something. And what do we need? We need to import joy from joy. Import joy from joy. And this is going to be joy.object. And joy.object equals, am I missing an equal sign? New book schema equals. Oh,
Before you define it, try to define it.
Yeah, equals, here we go. This is better. Joy.object, haha. There we go. Okay, what do we want to require of our new books? Well, let's kind of go into our database and see what's up with books. And this is localhost. Let's connect to my Mongo cluster. And let's go to Retro Amazon, books. All right. So we got an ISBN, a title, author, genre, year, price, and description. IDs are generated by Mongo. Well, in my database, all of this is going to be required. How about that? No optional fields. If you're putting a new book in, you're giving me all the important, relevant information. So ISBN is a string. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Is that right? How many characters is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 characters. Okay, let's start with ISBN. ISBN is the first, which is a joy string. Let's trim. And minimum is 14 characters. And it's required. All right, let's go to the Joy docs. It's always a good idea. Joy.dev. And let's go to the string. Safe to say requires only A through Z, A through Z, 0 through 9. No, alpha num's not good because we need a hyphen, right? And a hyphen would not be alphanumeric. Case of lower? No. I don't think our data has to be lowercase. Are there even letters?
No, ISBNs are usually
Just numbers, yeah.
numbers.
Okay. But there's also hyphens, so you got to factor that in.
You could do credit card.
But it's no.
Some of them have
Yeah, it's similar, but I think different enough. Okay. Well, for now, 14 characters required. ISBN. Next one would be title. Title. Joy string trim. I'm assuming your title has to have something. At least one character. Let's do author. Joy string trim. Sure, min1 required. Genre. Now, genre is interesting because we can have certain valid genres. And let me kind of let's look at the docs. And how do you get valid options? And so okay, we're kind of going through objects. Let's go back to my string. String email, string GUID, host name, insensitive. Give me one more second, I'll figure this out. Done it before. Truncate, uppercase, URI, symbols, maps. Okay. I've got this answer. Give me one second. Which is good for you guys to have, so give me a second to find it.
So Matt, I found one that almost worked for the ISBN, but it is an underscore instead of a hyphen.
Almost. Okay, this one's string.valid. Okay, string.valid. So it's genre. Joy.string.valid. And you can kind of see the values here that are considered valid. Now, what are our valid genres? We'll do fiction with a capital F, And I'm not sure about the case sensitivity here. So that'll be something. What else do we have? Genre. Magical realism. All right. Just to kind of match some of the current data. And we got fiction, dystopian. Of course, nonfiction is going to be an option. Let's do mystery. Dystopian, fiction, young adult. Okay, let's just go ahead and add in nonfiction, of course. So you get a feel for allowing just certain valid values. What else? Genre, publication year. Publication underscore year. How about that? We'll do joy.number, integer, minimum 1900, max 2023. Price. A number with a min of 0. Yes?
Did you need to use double quotes for the last one?
Ah. Yeah, you can go single quote. You can go double quote. But let's stay consistent. Yeah.
Is there a way to make it so it at least requires all of them are optional, but it requires at least one of them to be there? You get what I'm saying?
It doesn't matter which one.
Yeah.
Nah, I don't. Maybe, but I don't know how. I don't.
Like on our update users say,
Oh well.
you don't want to have just.
Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to validate that the object has properties, and so I would look under the object docs and see if there's like at least has one or something like that. Yeah. Good question. And finally, a description. Okay. So that's our new book schema for our new book. And now that we have our middleware function, called valid body, we just got to pass our schema to our valid body on the route. So let's go down here to add, comma, valid body, and you pass in, not in quotes, new book schema, comma. And so to go back into valid body, if it works, it basically keeps the data in the rec.body. And so if I kind of come back here and I go to new book, clearly add a new book, this is going to fail because we don't have all of our fields. And this is giving me the error that I would expect. It's going to say all the errors, right? ISBN is required, publication year is required, price is required. Okay, so let's start adding these in. ISBN. We said 14 numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's ISBN. Publication year. And we said it's got to be in a range. I'm going to throw a number outside of the range just to get publication year. Price, $10. And we said price needs to be a number, but again, a string 10 should be fine converted to a decimal 10. So that should pass. What we got next? Description. Okay. So now we've got all the fields. And data still should not be good. And so there you go. Publication year should be at least 1900. So let's say 2023. And anything else we want to test here? Like if I leave author off, it's not happy because author is required. If I put fictions, genre must be one of the following, right? So it's not happy about fictions. Plural needs to be. Now I'm going to try lowercase f. And still the same thing. It is case sensitive. I would hope that would be the case. All right, so I'm just trying a bunch of different ways to get back error messages, and that's all good. And if you give all the good information, now it goes through. It says book how to code 5 was added. If I go back to my database, refresh, I got 25 results now. Probably gonna have to page over to see how to code 5. I'm gonna delete all these books that don't have full properties. All right, so we'll go ahead and continue. Deleting a book by the ID, again, once you have the middleware written, it becomes pretty easy to say valid ID and pass it a string ID. Again, this identifier has to match this identifier, and it creates a rec.id, again, by this identifier. So we could call this something different, right? If we called this, book ID, whatever, it's a variable name, right? So you change it here, you change it here, and then it becomes rec.book ID, right? And so it creates a property called book ID because, again, this is sent into that function and it creates that property. So in the case of a book ID, yes, sir.
You doing a lecture?
I am.
They were asking somebody to come out and talk to a prospective student.
Okay, I can pause it. Neat is right. We are back at it. Max, did you have a question that I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, so let's go to delete a book by ID. So let's go back to our, let's get my book. That book isn't found. Let's go to get all my books. And here's my latest book. So I'm going to delete a book by ID, and let's first give it an ID that does not exist. I'm going to put the number of 8 instead of 9. And it says not deleted. Why does it say not deleted? Well, if I go to delete, we try. If the deleted count is 1, we say book deleted. Otherwise, we say book not deleted. Okay, so we're getting back this response, book not deleted, because, well, the deleted never happened. So that's what I would expect. Now let's pass it something that's, let me leave a digit off. And this is Joy. Joy is saying book ID is not a valid ID. And now let's give it the number of 9. You wahoo, and we're getting our book deleted. We can confirm that our book is deleted because if I go to get a book by the ID, pass that in, it says the book is not found. Connor?
Because we were just talking about like slight customization with the Joy. You know how earlier when you showed us if we didn't have one of the parameters that were there, it was that big whole list.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would be the way to clean that up to like make it so it's just one line of text instead of like a giant array?
You're gonna need, because that's all a big object is what that is, and you'd have to drill down into the properties of that object to just,
So it's more work than it's worth.
it's up to you. Yeah, you're capable, but that's how you do it.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so that's deleting a book. Now, the most interesting one is going to be update. Let's start with valid ID. Okay, so we're going to both have a valid ID and a valid body. Okay, so here's rec.body, here's ID. Let's valid ID this thing and say ID here, comma. Okay, so valid ID. Now we no longer need rec.params ID. This is a string. We need the object ID that is now found at rec.id. Okay, so that's all we need to refactor there. But if we're going to do valid body, then let's also make a schema for what the update schema looks like. So let's say const update book schema. Really, you can just update any one of these. None of these are required, right? It's going to look very similar to new book schema, but probably nothing is required. So let's just start with the copy paste and taking off the required. Let's just start there because that's reasonable.
Do you have to put optional if it's not required?
No.
No. So by default, it's
Yeah.
optional.
Yeah. So let's just start there. So this update book schema, this is going to enforce, hey, if you give me an ISBN, it's 14 characters long, but if you don't give me an ISBN, then I don't update it. And I don't know, do you let someone update the ISBN? I don't know. Sure, maybe they have a typo on the way in, so let's let them update it. Let's now go down to our update route, and after the valid ID, let's do valid body and pass it the update book schema, comma. Okay. It's really, once you get the middleware written, now we're just using it, it becomes pretty simple. Connor?
Is the placement?
No, the order doesn't matter. No. No, I mean, in the sense of getting it to work, the order doesn't matter. The only way that it matters is that it does valid ID first, and then it does valid body, and then it does this anonymous function. Like literally it goes middleware 1, it finishes, calls next. Middleware 2, finishes, calls next. Next is this middleware 3. This is a middleware. It is the last middleware in the line. So at the end of it, you're done. And you send a response.
Also, something that was stated at the beginning, it looks like you don't need return next. Because you just put that in
Yeah. Literally, I think if you were to leave like this return off. So I'm going to modify this function. I think by hitting next. Now here's what return does. So you can actually hit next and then it'll come back to this function, but I think if you hit return next and it doesn't come back to this function is what the keyword return does there.
It might be the difference because this one has a try catch and the other one didn't have it because it was in an if-else statement.
Yeah, so I think when you put the keyword return, it doesn't come back to this function and continue running, even though coming back wouldn't do anything. Yeah.
On book, I think on your line 63, were you supposed to pass the valid body update book schema or just update book?
Aha.
That's what I thought.
Update book schema. Good eye.
Huzzah.
Huzzah. Okay, so let's update our book. Let's kind of go back to adding a new book and let's create this same book again. It's kind of nice, by the way, when you create a new book to give you the object ID in the return. That's kind of nice. So that when I go to update my book by ID, now again here's my ID and my params, and then I'm going to update the price to 13. And let's just see if that works. It says book updated. So if I go to get book by ID and I throw that in, I get a price of 13. So my update is still working. But let me go to genre sci-fi, and that should crash because genre is not sci-fi is not valid, right? So I can update just one field. If I go to update this one, let's change it to mystery. We don't know what it is, so there's our mystery. And if I go to update my book here, now our genre is also changed. And maybe we give it a bad ID. A, not found. That's what I would expect. And if I give it one less character, it says ID is not valid ID. All of this is working as expected.